All right, hello everyone. I'm going to try and invite Rosalyn. How will I send this to myself? Are you on mute?
Wait. Hello. There we go.
Hey, Rosalyn.
How have you been doing?
I've been really.
I've been sick, trying to recover, school. I just wanted to start by saying I really like that the United States, specifically about emphasis on trying to bring more people to understand different points of view and the economical nature of our political climate, pivoting from the sharp divisiveness of modern politics in the U.S.
Military design movement that I have met through Dr. Zweibelson, who's there. And it's interesting for me to think about the military design movement because these people are such professionals. They're in the military, they're officers or they're retired or something. But what's interesting is that these people obviously feel like the redheaded stepchildren within their milieu as well. So what I'm trying to respond to in what you're saying is this sense, which it's really important not to get like judgmental about it, I think, but it's this sense of like for those of us, or it's difficult to know exactly how to express because so much of what's going on is that a lot of people are not educated into interesting ideas and being really thoughtful about it, but also really understanding that it's important to have things like humility, vulnerability, compassion, and that those actually there. You can be as smart as you want, but if you're unkind, ultimately your intelligence is not be serving anyone. So anyway, it's just something from talking to this like toga true person and stuff like that. It's just like, yeah, like it's a big issue that we have that many people don't seem ready yet. I think it's important to put it in this like it's going to happen, but like it's really important to almost like warm people up. It's almost like a warm up exercise to do a dance, and like we want to do a new kind of social dance, but everybody's more the kind of person who's at the middle school dance and is too shy and embarrassed to dance. So anyway, that's what I'm thinking about when you say that. Yeah, I definitely think it's important not to leave, I'll put it this way, it's important not oh, yes, I did, I put it on mute. I'm afraid if there's gonna be feedback, but we'll just have to deal with that if it comes up. Um, I was gonna say, I think it's important I'm gonna put it this way in a cheeky way, I think it's important not to leave, nations to the nationalists. Um, it's similar to a lot of things, I think, where it's really important not like just because there are people that you disagree with and they talk about something, that doesn't mean you shouldn't talk about what they talk about. I think it's in a way more important than ever to talk about what they're talking about so that you can put your own spin on it. So that when people think about that topic, they don't just think about people that you disagree with. I think it's really important for any political and cultural project stone unturned and really to leave nothing untouched by the influence of whatever you consider to be a high quality of intention. Um, with that being said, for me, I definitely don't think about the action. Like I'm not that motivated by the sense that I'm an American or a German. I mean, these are things that like I understand are really projected onto me and I sort of like play with that projection. But in terms of my heart of hearts or something, which might not even really be the question. But anyways, in terms of the heart of hearts, I don't think that anything, what to say, I think it's for me, it's really important to talk a lot about the category of all sentient beings, which really goes even beyond all people. So I'm not sure how I think I saw something on Twitter recently that you enjoy Christian universalism. So I appreciated that. Um, but for me, it's even beyond. It's not just the people who are alive now. It's not just beyond all humans that have ever existed and their souls, but it's something about all of sentient beings and the way in which all moments in space and time are connected together. And so, in my opinion, this idea of a nation is sort of like it goes back to what I was saying before in the sense of like a lot of people they're not ready yet or something, or it doesn't, the kind of ideas that I have are not intuitive to a lot of people. And so what is more intuitive is this idea of like, oh yeah, we have this group of people, we've been on this territory, and that all that goes into a nation. And so that idea, um, even a lot of people out there might not agree. If they were setting up their own world history, maybe they wouldn't set it up with nations or something. But I think people understand it as a fait accompli. It goes back to what I was saying about, maybe I don't identify as an American, but a hell of a lot of people would think of me as an American or think of me as a white man or something. And so it's all well and good for me to say, oh, well, I don't really identify. But I mean, it's a little bit coy or just kind of stubborn not to acknowledge that of course there are categorizations that are pretty uniform, even if it does get subtle into every person's interpretation of those categories. Like a lot of people anyway use these categories of nation, and so in some of the work that I've done, it has definitely gone into sort of lore building and trying to find good things about America, things like Martin Luther King and Beloved Community, or John Brown and or Nat Turner and radical racial egalitarianism, or Lincoln's second inaugural talking about malice toward none and charity for all. Anyway, plus, anyway, but then as far as Canada, I'm thinking of just the Métis tradition. I had a friend from Canada, and like the way in which Indigenous and Europeans actually sort of interbred more on friendly terms rather than very bitter conquest terms in the Métis. And then, I make a lot of hay out of Inuit mythology. So I'm always interested, even if, the Canada didn't create the Inuit, they didn't create Sedna, but Canada is what we call an imaginary collection of territory that includes the land where people did talk about Sedna and generate the myth of Silap Inua and things like that. And so, in that sense, I think the nation is sort of something that gestures beyond itself because it's this word or concept people have been using to refer to land and history that I don't think is really totally defined by that nation concept. Yeah, I wanted to respond just kind of briefly that it's a well-known thing in studying imperialism that nationalism and imperialism can be at odds. So, for example, like the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which of course did not survive World War One, it contained many nations inside of it. So, what are considered nations, right? Like Serbia or Croatia. I'm actually not great about the human geography, so apologize if I missed one or didn't include one or included one that's not supposed to be. But the point is, that Serbian nationalism was a threat to Austro-Hungarian imperialism. So what I am hearing from you is, yeah, you don't want to just get absorbed into the American imperial project. I think you might feel a little differently about it if you thought the American imperial project, or, God willing that it wasn't an imperial project, that the American project or whatever, if you thought that was worth pursuing, if you thought that was a good idea, then, maybe you might feel a little differently about it. But given that you don't want to just, America's already like the New York Yankees, right? It's already the strongest. So why make it even stronger if it has a bad quality of intention? Right. Right. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned what we would call the natural resources. I don't know. Anyway, that's just the way I'm putting it to you. But anyways, also brings to mind for me, the Arctic in this climate, this time of climate change, is becoming more and more relevant. And I think that's a big reason why that and Greenland are, on this chopping block. And I'm also looking at, there's the talk of Panama Canal, and of course the Suez Canal is the other major canal in the world, and it's right next to Israel. So it's an interesting way to think about possible American motivations, not just now, but for all these decades, right? In having an interest in Israel and how important the Panama Canal is, or sorry, the Suez Canal is. And so it's really striking to me, America is almost like it's gearing up for this competition. And of course, America has historically had this sea power advantage. America helped build the Panama Canal, and there was the 1957 Suez Crisis, where I think Israel, the Great Britain, and France tried to invade Egypt, and they wanted to take control over the Suez Canal, but America basically made them stop, and it was a really big moment where the Great Britain was humiliated in the sense of like, yeah, the days of the British Empire are over. Like, you don't it's going to decide what happens. That was ultimately about this canal, right? Which is about going to Africa, which is all about, Portugal going around Africa in 1450. It's all about the sea power and colonialism. It's the very same stuff that's going on anyway. And then the other thing I wanted to comment on that you said was this idea that like Canada and America, like we just get along. I definitely think right in this day and age, that sort of thing's being tested. And I think given where we've ended up now, I think it's possible to see the liberalism, the supposed liberalism of America, especially, and maybe also Canada. It's a pseudo liberalism, or you have to look at the tensions within liberalism. People have been talking about human rights for a couple hundred years, and they've been systematically enslaving Black people for even longer, or including rape as part of their social relations and mistreating women, basically using women as currency or playthings or whatever. Not to mention anybody. You don't have to be of a marginalized category. Even little young white boys, can be emotionally neglected and abused and raped themselves. Anyway, point is just that, there's a lot of this, idea, especially now that Trump is here and we're so afraid that he's going to be Adolf Hitler too. I think there's a little bit of, but I think it's important to see how, or I mean, not that I can exactly explain all the things how, but to have some inkling that whatever we thought was going on before, that's what led to this. And there is a lot of stuff under the hood in terms of that deep state, or in terms of that, whatever that you could describe as illiberal. People have mentioned this illiberal democracy or democratic backsliding type of thing. So, and that was even well before Donald Trump. So I'll just say that. Mhm. Yes, absolutely. Something that comes to mind for me when you're talking about, especially in America, we also have this, checks and balances. We talk about institutional norms. I don't think it's really about those things in particular. Like my evidence for that would be that the average American citizen doesn't really know how the Constitution works. I mean, we understand probably a lot of Americans can't even name the three branches of government. So the idea that, people are really invested in these checks and balances in particular is not that plausible to me. Um, but what I will say is very important about the whole idea of norms and something. It's basically, for me, it's a way we as individuals frame, like, approach our expectations for what's going to happen. So, like, there's a big difference between having this mentality where I would say it's a very pre-Trump mentality, where it's like, well, they, whoever they is, right? Whoever is in political power, they could never do this because that would just be so weird, like before Roe v. Wade was overturned, like, and what probably before Trump came along, but like in 2010 or something, over, like, the idea, there were certainly tens of millions of people in America who wanted to overturn Roe v. Wade, but it seemed much more like that's not going to happen because it's going to freak people out, and people can basically rely on their own sense of what would freak them out to know what is politically possible, because they can assume that what would freak them out is going to freak out tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of other people, and that therefore that's politically untenable, even for people who are, the oligarchs, right? So even if we don't actually think that the political structures or the rule of law is actually a check, and again, my evidence for that would be, look at what the American people think about the JFK assassination, or or the QAnon type stuff. And even if you're not into QAnon, like the basic question, or P. Diddy parties, like, do you think rich people commit sex crimes, and get away with it in a systematic way? I think most people would be open to that. And so that's where it's like, okay, so that we're not talking about the law. Like when we're talking about this Trump thing, like what we're talking about is the idea that Obama can send drones to Libya, and there was even that Michael Dorner guy, there, Christopher Dorner or something. There was a police officer who started killing people, and they killed him with a drone on American soil. But like that only happened one time. It didn't feel like something that was like And I mean, again, I think the average person's a little bit delusional. There's something called normalcy bias, where it's like we want to believe that things are not going to get really weird because we have all sorts of expectations we don't even know that we have that help structure our cognitive and emotional functioning. So anyway, I'm basically just trying to say I wouldn't necessarily say it's worse, but I think that Donald Trump, especially 2.0, is obviously so much of what's going on right now is like, yeah, there's our internal sense of what would freak us out can no longer guide our expectations because Panama might be under direct American control by the end of the year. Like buckle up is basically like what's going on right now. Right. Yeah, well, I think it's not just a question of whether they have that instinct. I think it has a lot to do with how they're reading the situation. Um, like, for example, with a norm, I'm imagining something like the Titanic disaster, or maybe something a little bit less severe. But the question is basically, there's been a disruption, like your plane has turbulence. So, you don't scream in terror on planes. If there's a little bit of turbulence and somebody starts screaming, like, that's a little weird. But like, how bad does the turbulence have to get before all of that goes out the window and everybody's just fucking terrified that they're gonna fucking die, right? So anyway, I think Donald Trump is the kind of figure. It reminds me of Breaking Bad, where the character says, "I am the one who knocks," which is basically about this idea of like, aren't you afraid somebody's going to come and knock on your door, and they're going to like say you're from the pearl clutching perspective, you did something that wasn't politically correct. Now somebody's going to call you out. Somebody's going to cancel you. And that's basically somebody coming and knock on your door, and it's going to be bad. And the character from Breaking Bad basically says, I am the one who knocks, right? So it's like, I am taking the initiative, which, to put it in Christian terms, for me would be something like, the Holy Spirit's flowing through me. Like, I'm an instrument of God. And so, like, the question of, what people think is correct and things, that is important because that's part of the social lay of the land. But on the other hand, like, I have my own private theory anyway. But it comes all down a lot, I think, to the analysis of the social situation and how unstable you think it is. And so Donald Trump is somebody in particular in the beginning. He basically understood that a lot of Americans really hate the immigration situation, to an extent that both parties were not speaking to, that he could run as a Republican and basically just talk about the border, and that immediately got him 20% or whatever. That was immediately his start. And then, of course, then he started with his whole provocateur thing, and he's pretty good at it. Anyways, so Yeah. Right. Yeah, something that's coming up for me is just the idea that just because, in my opinion, other people are not they're not pursuing their goal correctly, that doesn't mean they have a bad goal. Like there's a lot of different sorts of political mistakes that you can be making. So for example, like I would definitely not characterize myself as pro open borders, but not because not because I want closed borders, but just because I don't think it's the right way to talk about the issue. Because for me, open borders or the idea of freedom of movement, it's almost like a liberal idea. What I mean by that is like it's this thing where people own themselves, people have money, people spend money to be able to transport, like people sort of live their own lives. Whereas the social paradigm I'm interested in is more like a beloved community that extends to everyone. Um, and that does not imply for me that everybody's just going to get to do what they want all the time. It's actually a big issue with me to confront the issue of, totalitarianism as, I confront the idea of a total social fact. That's a thing from Durkheim, I want to say, which basically talks about how, we try to separate things out into politics and economics, and I have my life and you have your life, and I have my things. This is my room. Don't come in. But in reality, like we are implicated, we are overexposed to one another in ways that defy, in my opinion, like those conceptual boundaries. And so the conceptual boundaries can be more real than actual distinctions on the ground. So to get to what I'm saying here is basically to say, when I think of migration, I'm thinking about climate change. And so the idea that the equator of the earth could basically become uninhabitable, and that there are places where there are people who currently live that they are not going to be able to survive there for much longer, especially the way that they are right now. So for me, ethically, philosophically, is it appropriate to basically tell such a person that they need to stay where they are because other land is already spoken for? For me, that's an abomination. That's not Christian, right? So That's not ethical. And so there is an imperative. It must be the case, right, that people are allowed to go to places that are conducive to their survival. If the alternative is that they have to stay somewhere where they're going to die. So, given that those people are going to be coming, there's certain, but fundamentally, I think the issue with immigration, which you can also see in Europe, it comes down, you have to turn back around and really think about this problem of assimilation, because the problem is not that there are people here. The problem is that the people who are here don't get along. And from the nativist, the indigenous European or the Native American, like, anyway, it's funny, we call it nativism in the US, but we're all settlers. But the point is, uh, like, even the people who are already here don't get along. And so this idea that, the problem is that these people, they're from a different culture and whatever, like, there are cultural issues. I'm not trying to deny that, but you cannot use that as a reason why we can't get along. It goes back to the first topic of just like, why is it that people don't seem to be able to handle challenging their worldviews, and why is it so hard to try and do that in a way that winds up being agreeable to everyone? I think that's a problem that we are all called to address as quickly as possible, because whatever solution space is there, it's going to have to rely on people actually being able to adapt very quickly once they realize that there is an openness in other people, and that, like, the drive to change is not always a threat. It is also an invitation, right, for us to think about ourselves in a new way, and live up to what we consider to be the duty that we have to our ancestors in a new way. So those are some of my thoughts. Right. Mm. Mhm. Yeah, I do just want to say I think it'd be good. Oh, we're already. Oh, I guess we started a little bit late. But anyway, I'm going to go in a few minutes. Um, but I wanted to say that um, you were talking about people not wanting to give up their individualism and their way they like to live their life. And I'm thinking about when people are in a disaster, like when if there's a tsunami that comes and destroys your house, all of a sudden you're not that possessive over your house anymore, are you? Anytime you get off the highway, there's liable to be a beggar there. And like somebody who is a beggar is just bad for you, that is not part of the calculus of like, oh no, I don't want to give up everything I have going for me. Many people don't have anything going for them, right? So anyway, but the other thing is it's not just a question between the privileged versus the non-privileged. It's also a thing that we live in a disaster situation, again, kind of similar to the Titanic, where it's like the ship is sinking, it just takes a while. So it eventually sinks in for people that, oh, because individualism and collectivism are not really opposites. Like in order to have an idea of who you are as an individual, you have to be taught what that means by other people. And in order for there to be a collective of people, there have to be individual people who are invested in it and are consistently making choices that give rise to this sort of idea. Um, yeah, so for a language to exist, individual people have to say things. If individual people didn't choose to say things, then there would be no language and there would be no linguistic community. But on the other hand, nobody invents their own language when they're a child. You have to be taught a language. So that's a good way to explain how I kind of think about it. But yeah, I mean, I think the obvious for me, the solution space is to get people motivated to where we do want to work this out, and we understand that the best use of our freedom and of like the choices that we can make is to try and protect ourselves and the people that we care about. And I think it's important for us to realize that we have actually a lot of influence, because a lot of people, I think that they can't do anything about it, but I don't really think that's true. But so once you realize that you actually can do something about it, then all of a sudden it's like, you're standing outside a building that just caught on fire and there's a child inside. And it's like, well, are you going to do something or not? And it's all well and good to say that you were on your way to the store to get some ice cream and you shouldn't have to sacrifice your trip to the store just for somebody else's problem. But it's like, do you have a heart or not? And I think that is basically, the question that is increasingly going to confront us. And, there's just all sorts of levels at which the solutions need to be worked out from the inside of bureaucracies, because the people who are staffing them are motivated in a certain way. So maybe they don't understand a changing logic, down to how a bureaucracy interacts with the citizens of a country, because there could be mutual distrust there. And then we're talking about immigration, right? The citizens of a country versus immigrants, and then illegal and illegal, or whatever. So, yeah, there's a lot to it, but ultimately I think it's, it's something like the Good Samaritan. We all need to learn to be the Good Samaritan. And if we don't, like, that is the way. And like, yeah, it seems hard, but like for me, it's like, that's what there is to think about and problem solve about. And if we don't focus like a laser on that, which is basically a distributed, practical compassion, that seems like what's worth doing. So I'll throw it over to you and let you have the last word. Yeah. All right. Well, I posted a link to your link tree. I've been speaking with this been an experimental unit. I'm AI. Been talking with Rosalyn Mitchell. Rosalyn Mitchell runs Evangeline Press on Substack. I put the link tree, which includes a link to that, in the description. But Rosalyn, if you'd like to say anything else by way of belated introduction or talking about where people can find your work, feel free to do that. Absolutely. You can also find me on X at Experimental Unit with no E on the front. And you can catch me and Rosalyn reposting and boosting each other up. So looking forward to see you out there, Rosalyn. God bless. Bye.